Imagine a garden crop that asks almost nothing of you and yet offers more nutritional density than rice, corn, beans, or any other cereal crop. Something you can eat every single day, is easy to grow, and stores all winter long without canning, refrigeration, or freezing. And that is exactly why, if I could only plant one thing to feed my family all year long, it would be sweet potatoes. Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, I can almost guarantee you're gonna wanna plant some too, and today we're gonna talk about how. In this video, we'll talk about why sweet potatoes truly are the ultimate crop, my best growing tips and tricks for growing it, how to carefully harvest without damaging your crop, and then we'll talk about curing and storing your harvest all winter long, even if you don't have a root cellar. And finally, we'll talk about my secret for growing bigger, better sweet potatoes every single year, completely for free. So why would we choose sweet potatoes as our storage crop? I like mashed potatoes just like the next guy. I spent a lot of my young life living in Asia, so I'm used to eating rice with every meal. Corn is even so great that it's had songs written about it. I mean, it's got the juice.
It's corn.
And of course, it's really hard to make a delicious baguette without wheat, which is where flour comes from. However, as a lazy gardener and a huge fan of efficiency in every regard, I would choose sweet potatoes over all the rest of them every single day. Here's why. Sweet potatoes are very easy to grow. They are pretty tolerant of poor soils and drought and other farmy conditions that make it hard to grow food. And while you can definitely increase your sweet potato yield by doing a couple things throughout the growing season, if you want to just plant it and forget it, you absolutely can, and you'll still get a really decent harvest considering the amount of effort. Last fall, when I was planning this year's spring and summer garden, I had no idea at that time that I was actually pregnant, or that come spring and early summer, I would be in the later stages of my pregnancy and that basically the garden was going to be a bust. Because, you know, when you're 9.5 months pregnant, it's awfully hard to do hard manual labor. And to make matters worse, my donkeys and dogs ended up treating the main garden like their own personal playground while I was out having a baby. And so that whole garden was a total loss. But despite doing everything technically wrong with my sweet potatoes, this is what happened. Oh my gosh! Look at this thing, are you kidding me? Well, seems the lazy garden worked. Whew, she's a good one. Boy, howdy. Whew, that's a weird one. It's like digging for gold, or really digging for sweet potato fries, which is the Lord's way to eat sweet potatoes, and my favorite sub at a restaurant. If they've got sweet potato fries, we're gonna be eating them. Hey buddies, come here, come here, come here. You guys want some sweet potato vines? I bet you'll love those. Sweet potatoes are a dual purpose crop, which means that you can eat both the greenery, which is prolific and tastes a whole lot like spinach and acts a whole lot like spinach if you want to put it in your smoothies or your salads or anything else all year long. But then you can also eat the roots that were the intended purpose of growing the vines in the first place. But also, what is this but wonderful mulch? We can put it in our compost to create compost, or we can lay it out over our garden beds to help them overwinter better. We can make sure that we never leave our soil uncovered. This is garden gold, my friends, in every single way. Sweet potatoes aren't just delicious, they're also one of the most nutritionally important crops in the world. One medium sweet potato provides over 300% of our daily required vitamin A. That's good eyesight, skin health, and immunity all in one beautiful root. They're loaded with fiber, vitamin C, manganese, potassium, and antioxidants. Sweet potatoes have almost as many calories as rice, but you can grow them in much smaller space without specialized equipment, without rice patties and whatnot. They require far less processing, and you can store them in a bin under your bed. For a homesteader or anyone else trying to grow food for their family in uncertain times, this is gold. Contrary to common belief, the regular potato and the sweet potato are not actually related. And though a lot of people would argue that growing regular white potatoes or yellow potatoes or red potatoes would be a whole lot easier and more efficient than growing sweet potatoes, for quick, easy reference, this is my potato patch that I planted at the exact same time and in the exact same way as the sweet potato patch. Let's start digging and see what gold we can uncover. Here's one, couple more. Oop, Here's a couple. Here's a couple. This should be a great time to use that SpongeBob 3 hours later clip.
3 hours later.
Full disclosure though, when I say that I planted the potatoes just like I planted the sweet potatoes, I did not do it the quote-unquote correct way. I didn't, you know, sprout them correctly or anything. I literally just took the pieces of potatoes that had little heads on them and tossed them in some soil and tried to call it good, which is incidentally exactly what I did for the sweet potatoes too. It's just that, as you can see, one of my ventures was significantly more successful than the other. As lazy gardeners, we do not like experiments in labor for futility's sake. And seeing how many potatoes I've gotten so far, it's literally not even worth it to pick the rest of them. So we're gonna abandon this effort and call this the Great Potato Harvest of 2025. Ta-da! Sweet potatoes don't start from seeds, they start from slips, like this. We get these slips from last year's sweet potatoes, and there are all kinds of ways that you can look up online to grow the maximum number of slips from every sweet potato if you want to. But I like to do things the lazy way, and this last year I certainly did it the laziest way possible, which was to literally just throw some of last year's old tubers that had some eyes on them into the ground and let them do what they did. But assuming that this is your first year growing sweet potatoes and you are planting from slips like this that you got from a nursery or elsewhere, here's a quick tip. First of all, roots of a plant are where everything it needs has to come from. And in that, if there's a whole bunch of foliage or leaves up above where the roots are, then that is going to require way more from the roots. So we can require a whole lot less from those roots by cutting off the majority of the foliage like that, and then planting something that looks a little bit more like this. Because the more leaves there are up top, the more those tiny little roots have to work hard to support. And because this is a root vegetable, what we really want are more roots and less plant. So we want to do whatever we can with this plant to support the roots rather than the plants. And that's something that's pretty different than a lot of the other things we plant in our garden. So I think it's really important to make that distinction, that with our sweet potatoes, we're doing everything we can to support healthy root development, and whatever happens with the foliage is what happens. A lot of times when we think of soil fertility, we think of nitrogen, because nitrogen is what makes green things grow. And for a lot of our garden, having a lot of nitrogen is great because it will promote green things growing above the soil. But what we actually want with our sweet potatoes is not a ton of greenery, though this is edible and quite delicious. What we really want are the tubers beneath. And in that, making sure that our soil has tons of phosphorus and potassium, things that actually promote root growth, rather than having an excess of nitrogen, is a really big deal. Because sweet potatoes spread from their foliage, every time their foliage has a chance to touch the ground or touch water and moisture, it's going to put down more roots. And early in the season, that's great because every little root system it puts down means potentially more sweet potatoes that'll grow from those roots. But later in the season, all of those roots aren't actually going to do us any good because they're not going to have time to turn into tubers or edible roots. And so in that, every once in a while, if you can come by with a rake and just rake the edges of your patch back into the middle of the pile so that these things are sitting on top of other sweet potato leaves instead of actually getting their feet into the ground and starting rooting, the better. But I can actually kill two birds with one stone, both cutting back on the weeds and also discouraging this plant's natural propensity to create way more plants than roots by coming through twice in the season, that's all, with my weed eater and just knocking back the edges of the growing area. And by doing that, I've found that it both encourages a lot more downward growth and also helps the sweet potatoes to compete with whatever weeds happen to be in this area. If you've been around this channel for a while, you know I'm a huge proponent of removing the stigma of talking about mental health. And that's why I'm proud to partner with the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. In so many areas of life, it's our natural inclination to try to push the easy button. When we're having issues with our plants in the garden, our first reaction is very rarely that we need to fix the soil, because healthy soil grows healthy plants. And it's very similar with our mental health. Very few of us want to actually do the work. We want someone to give us the quick fix, the quick answer that'll help us solve our problems. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. And that's why finding a good therapist is so important. Thankfully though, BetterHelp actually does offer an easy button when it comes to so many of the obstacles so many of us face when it comes to trying to get matched with a good therapist. Be able to easily schedule and reschedule our appointments. Easily change our therapist if things aren't working out well. Find group therapy sessions where we can hear from more people about similar issues. My favorite thing about BetterHelp is that I never have to actually leave the farm to meet with my therapist, which gives me a whole lot more time to snuggle with these guys. I knew that I'd finally found a good therapist when I walked away from every single appointment, not feeling validated, but feeling like I was well equipped to do the work that I needed to do on my own. My therapist provided me with new tools, better perspective, new ways of looking at things, and new things to try when I'm feeling stuck. That's what a great therapist should do. So if you're feeling stuck, exhausted from trying as hard as you can possibly try and still finding yourself in the same situations over and over, if you're trying your best and don't know how to try any differently, or if you've run out of different ways to ask for help, check out BetterHelp, because having the right support system is the key to rediscovering your own strength and a sense of hope for whatever's coming next. Just click the link in the video description or go to betterhelp.com/AnnofAllTrades for 10% off of your first month of therapy and start working towards the change you've been hoping for. Especially in warmer, more humid climates like Tennessee, sweet potatoes are going to grow basically like a weed later in the season. So we don't have to be super precious about how we take care of them or where we plant them or anything else. But if we want to maximize our harvest, we always want to do everything we can do to potentially maximize our harvest. At the early stages when we're growing our slips, sweet potatoes really like having wet feet. But once they actually start wanting to form tubers, they really like to be planted in loose, well-draining, sandy soil. If you're growing in a place that has a relatively short growing season, or if there's a lot of cold weather leading up to your hot weather, planting these things early is not actually a good idea. You want to wait until soil temperatures are 65 to 70 degrees consistently throughout the 90 to 120 days that you need to actually grow these things, because cold weather is going to stunt your plant, cause it to grow more slowly. It might actually cause it not to mature at all, regardless of how hot the temperatures are later in the season. Another really important thing with sweet potatoes is moderating our watering. Watering too much is going to cause fungal issues to really take root and is not going to encourage the plant to actually root the way that we want it to. So I know this is not super helpful by saying just don't do it too much, but make sure you do it enough. But a good rule of thumb is that in the heat of the day during the peak growing season, if your plants are looking a little sad and wilty, that's great. But if you come back after dark and they're still sad and wilty, that's a good indication that a good long drink, like a couple hours with a sprinkler, one time, is all they really need. There are tons of different varieties of sweet potatoes that you can grow, but my advice is to grow two. The orange ones because they're the easiest to grow and they have really good nutritional value. But if you have a longer growing season and decently well-draining soil, the purple varieties of sweet potatoes are also great because they are way easier to store longer and it provides a little bit of diversity and flavor. When it comes to pests and diseases for the sweet potato, there are a lot of different things that can happen a lot of different areas. But basically, the two biggest things to watch out for are things like flea beetles to cause a lot of damage to the foliage, which are basically the solar panels helping collect the sun's energy to turn it into delicious and delightful giant tubers or roots, which is what we really want out of this plant. The other really big issue for a lot of people, a lot of places trying to grow these, are fungal issues that are caused by too moist or too wet of conditions and too much cold. And both the flea beetle and other early pest issues and fungal issues that most people end up having when they're planting sweet potatoes come from planting these things too early in the season. So just procrastinate a little bit. Just like any good lazy gardener would do, plant them a little bit later in the season, and you'll ultimately have to deal with way fewer pest and disease issues. The other real PITA, if you want to spell it out, that these things suffer from is mice, rats, gophers, woodchucks, all of those things that burrow underground. And in that instance, I highly recommend you get yourself some cats or some traps, and that's all we're going to say about that. Going from this to this takes about 90 to 120 days. When your vines start to yellow, that's a really good indication that it is time to harvest. Otherwise, right before the first frost is a great time to do it because you definitely don't want to wait till after the first frost. To maximize our sweet potato harvest and make sure that we don't lose any of our sweet harvest to bruising or breaking those sweet potatoes, we want to start 10 to 18 inches back away from where we know those roots have taken root and start breaking up the soil. And we can do that with a broad fork if you have one, or a potato fork, or even a rake. And what we want to do is we want to just gently loosen that soil so that we can then come in afterwards and start digging it back by hand. And as you can hear, for my broad fork, this was not an area that was really amazingly good soil to start. It was actually pretty solid clay, and all I did to prep it was put a bucket of compost and a bucket of mulch on. So even in less than ideal growing conditions, we'll see what we can pull out of here. I should also mention that sweet potato harvest day actually starts the evening before I'm ready to harvest my sweet potatoes, because I just put the sprinkler out here to lightly moisten the soil so that I'm not trying to pull sweet potatoes out of hard, dry clay. So yeah, just give the soil a little sprinkle before you start. You definitely don't want to overwater it, because overwatering will make soupy, muddy soil that then will likely result in accidentally bruising or damaging your sweet potatoes as you're pulling them. So after I've loosened that soil, I pull the foliage back, and if you're trying to eke out every last calorie, boy howdy, are those edible. But also, we're gonna have a lot here, so let's just let that go. A lot of people will also try to pull their sweet potatoes up along with the foliage of the plant, and that is a great way to further damage them, especially if you're in, like we are here, less than ideal soil. So as we're pulling this foliage back, we just want to now come in with our hands and dig back and reveal all of these incredible tubers that are now slightly below the soil's surface. And again, just remember, as I'm pulling these, that this was not the dream way to do it, and it probably could have been a way bigger, better harvest if I had taken a lot more care. But this season, like many others, more care would have meant that this didn't happen at all. And boy howdy, am I going to be pleased with whatever we do get and can use from this year's harvest. Do you see it? Do you see it? Isn't that so cool? Yeah, buddy. That's gonna go in your baby food soon. There we go. This is what we're looking for. Ah, broke one. Impatience is not a virtue, my friends. This is one we'll have to set aside to eat earlier in the season, because it's gonna go bad faster. But not the end of the world by any means. So as you see me pulling all these sweet potatoes out, don't think that we are at the end of the video yet, because the most important piece of actually having sweet potatoes to eat all year long is what's coming up next. So stay tuned. Look at that, buddy. That's a big one. It's like the size of your fat little thigh. which are gonna get fatter with the help of these sweet taters. Growing and harvesting your sweet potatoes is only half the battle when it comes to long-term storage of something that can feed your family. The last and most important step is to cure your sweet potatoes. The curing process heals skin wounds on the potatoes and starts converting the starches into sugars, which is what makes them taste so good. But one really important note between the harvesting and curing process is do not wash or rub off your sweet potatoes in any regard before curing them, because right when they're first picked, their skins are super tender and very fragile, and it's really easy to either damage the skins while washing them or to mess up the curing process by getting them wet, brushing them, etc., etc. So wait to do any of that till you're ready to put them away after the curing process. Curing is a very fancy way of saying that we need to put these bad boys aside one layer deep, somewhere that there can be some moderate airflow over them for 7 to 10 days before we do anything else with them. This is going to harden the skins and make them easily storable for 6 to 12 months. Ideal curing conditions for sweet potatoes are 80 to 85 degrees and then 80 to 85% humidity for 7 to 14 days. One last really important consideration when it comes to curing our sweet potatoes. If you waited until too late in the season to cure them outdoors, or if you don't have a place to cure them outdoors where they're getting indirect sunlight for that 7 to 14 day period, a great option is to just lay them out flat somewhere indoors and then place a box fan nearby and run it on low over them so that there's at least a little air circulation. And that's not just a solution for sweet potatoes, it also works for all the other storage crops as well. And when we lived in Seattle, didn't have a covered porch, and it never got sunny or dry enough to cure anything outside, that's the way we had to do it. Now, in a dream world, we'd all have a root cellar we could then take our cured sweet potatoes down to, but not all of us have a root cellar. Most of us don't even have basements. In fact, because we don't have a root cellar is actually why I initially chose sweet potatoes as our storage crop, because sweet potatoes are a whole lot more forgiving than a lot of the other long-term storage crops in far less ideal circumstances. And in that, once our sweet potatoes are cured, we actually just keep them in buckets in our garage. It's not fancy, but it works. If you live somewhere that's a lot colder than here and your garage freezes during the winter, it's a far better idea to keep them indoors in a closet or other pantry space. You can put them in boxes under your bed. If you're really worried about them going bad, you can individually wrap them in newspaper, but that's not really the lazy way. And when we're talking a few 100 pounds of sweet potatoes, that seems like a lot of extra work to me. Plus, we don't actually get a newspaper anymore. But if you are going to store these indoors, just make sure there's not a ton of light exposure, and again, that there's not huge fluctuations in temperature, because that'll reduce their storage time. Some people like to store their sweet potatoes in bins of sand or peat moss. Again, great option if you have it. We don't, so we don't. One thing you definitely do not want to do with your sweet potatoes, though, is put them in the fridge. The fridge is too cold for our sweet potatoes, and it will both ruin their flavor and also, ironically, lower their storage time. If you're worried about rodents or you have a ton of fluctuating temperatures in your garage, then storing your sweet potatoes indoors is probably a better option. Funny side note, our house rabbit, Eugene, actually got into my sweet potato storage one time and ate a whole bunch of sweet potatoes before we realized what was going on. And as promised, here's the secret to growing bigger, better sweet potatoes year after year completely for free. Every single year, set aside your biggest, healthiest couple sweet potatoes, and then next year, use those ones to grow your slips or your sweet potato starts from. Doing that year after year after year is going to ultimately help you to grow sweet potatoes that are specially adapted for your unique growing conditions. So your unique climate, your unique soil conditions, etc., etc. And if, as any lazy gardener would, you are also adding organic matter and compost and all the other things we talk about, you are then going to be improving your soil year after year, and your yields will thus increase exponentially as well. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will see you in the next video. Cheers! Oh gosh. Hi, Mr. Man. Hi, little boy. Are you the happiest boy in all the land? getting your sweet potatoes, buddy. We got your sweet potato. Food. Yeah. Are you the best boy? You're the best boy. You know how to land.